Hi everyone, this is Linda from Lily Poly Clay, and today we're going to talk about how to color your polymer clay. Now, of course, polymer clay comes in colors, but sometimes you need a little bit more color to enhance your project. So we're going to use the same textures that we worked with in my last video about texturing. This first one is the leather effect, where we use the aluminum foil. So as you can see, I've baked this and we have that leather effect in here, but we want to make that stand out more. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the most common way most people color polymer clay, and that's with acrylic paints. And I use the Deco Art Americana. It's easily available. It seems to cover well and work. People have their preferences when it comes to acrylic paints, but that's mine. So we're going to start off with the black paint, and we're going to use a technique. Now obviously you can just paint it back on, but we're going to use a different technique. We're going to use and you don't need much at all, just a little drop of the black, and you're going to thin this paint out. By adding some water, and I always keep water in a little spray bottle. There we go. I'm going to really thin that out, and then just to avoid some mess here, I'm going to put down like a card here, and you're going to take your paintbrush. So this is kind of like a wash technique. You're going to paint the whole thing, but you really have to make sure this is thin so it gets down in the grooves. You really want to get that in the grooves. Let it sit for a minute. You're going to take a paper towel or tissue and then wipe off the excess on the top. Then we'll let that sit and dry for a couple minutes. And so now the black has gotten into the grooves. And sometimes, well, I wiped it off a little too early, so it's not really in there, but sometimes you need to take a second go at it. And you don't want to use a really nice paintbrush that you're particularly fond of, because it is kind of rough on the brushes. There we go, that's a little better. So now we've got the darks in there. So next we want to kind of add some highlight to it. So this is kind of the exact opposite technique. Now we're going to dry brush it. So I'm using a lighter color, a lighter brown. Now I'm not going to add water to this. I'm going to use a stiffer bristle here on this brush. I'm going to put just a little bit of paint on there. And I'm going to come over here and get most of it off of there. And then, just very lightly, brush it on this piece. And you want to go light with this and just kind of build the color on there. Might not look like a lot's going on there right away, but that's okay, because you're going to keep the brush dry. You're going to put a little bit of paint, and you're just going to gently brush it on there. So now you have the contrast of the lighter brush color there and the dark grooves that really kind of brings out this leather effect. And you can do this for any piece. For animals and stuff, you use it to enhance the fur. Okay, so we'll set that aside. We'll move on to our next one. So all these techniques have a little bit of a mess factor to them. So make sure you have a wet wipe or something, or a wet cloth nearby to kind of clean up. This next technique is we're going to use for the texturing that we did with our etch and pearl tool. So this technique gets a little messy, so I'm going to put down a piece of aluminum foil and then the card, so it's easier to see for you, but it's going to probably bleed through this card. So we're going to use alcohol inks, which are a lot of fun, but kind of messy. And you can tell these are kind of well loved, but what we're going to do is we'll start with the citrus color. You might want to wear gloves when you do this because it does get kind of everywhere. So I'm dropping it on here. Look how it fills up those spaces. It's really kind of cool. I'm going to be fairly liberal with it. Take a Q-tip and just kind of spread it around. And this clay color is just super sculpey. It's kind of a fairly neutral color. So alcohol ink looks pretty cool on its own, but it really starts to, the magic really happens when you have a different color, when you add other colors to it. This is blue. And kind of let it do its work in there as it spreads. I should have taped this down on the back. And then what's cool about it is because it's alcohol based, you can then take a Q-tip or an eyedropper, something that has, you know, that you can hold the alcohol with. And so I have a bottle of alcohol here, and I'm just going to let this drip. So I have this alcohol here, and I'm just going to let it drip on there. See how it kind of makes it disappear, makes it spread. It's kind of like the acrylic pouring that's real popular right now. It just makes a cool effect on there. You can experiment with different colors, and I like the blue and the green together for if you were making something like a monster or something, or a frog, or I think that coloring together looks it looks really cool. Okay, so that's the alcohol inks. We're gonna set this aside. When that dries, it looks really neat. I think it looks neat now, but it will look different when it dries. Next medium, we're going to use Rub and Buff. So if you're doing any kind of steampunk project or any kind of project that you want to look like metal, this is the way to go. Very cool stuff. It does smell, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. So if you need to work with it, it's best to work with it in a more open space. So here we've got a piece of clay. I've put a little accent on there, but this is when we used the plastic knife to create the stitching effect. That's what's in there. So we're going to bring that stitching effect out with this Rub and Buff. And I'm going to go with the silver first. So this stuff comes in a little tube. And I find the easiest way to rub it on there is with a Q-tip. It's Some people wear gloves and then just use their finger, you know, their gloved finger for it. Because you're really, dog hair. Because you're really just rubbing it on there. And look how metallic that looks. And so if you rub it on there lightly, what happens is it gives it kind of an antique effect because it doesn't go down into that groove. So that stitching groove, you still see it. It's really pretty cool. And it, once it's, you know, covered, it really looks like metal. It's pretty awesome stuff. Takes a little while to dry. And it is a little bit messy. But it's a really cool effect. It looks almost white on the screen. There we go. See how shiny that is? It's awesome. It's fun stuff. And I have the gold. I'll show you what the gold looks like on the accent piece. And you can get this in the craft stores. Oh, I love that antique gold. I love how that looks. Okay. It's a cool little piece, huh? As you can see, even though polymer clay is already colored, you can buy it already colored, there's other ways to color it. I mean, they do sell metallic clays, but it's not going to look like that when it's baked. There's a couple brands that are close. I think Cernit, from what I've read, is a really good simulation of silver, but it's not going to look like this. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So these two clays that we have next are not baked. The first three were baked. The next two, the last two that we're going to do is unbaked, and the reason why is because we're adding pigment to it that's going to need to set when you bake it. It just works better that way. It doesn't have to be that way, but it just adheres to the clay and then it bakes into it so it doesn't rub off of the clay. So the first one that we're going to do is a chalk. So both of these next two techniques are powder techniques, but using different mediums. So this one is a chalk pastel, which a lot of artists, if you're, already have. So what I've done is, this is the clay technique, the texturing, that was the needle tools that made a fur effect. So I've kind of simulated fur on an animal here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the chalk pastel. I'm going to use just an X-Acto knife just to get a nice fine dusting here. Then I'm going to take a brush, like a fine, a soft brush like this. And get some of that pigment on there. And then we're just going to go over the clay here. Oops. You can see I put a little bit more of it on this side, made it a little darker, but you can use pastels to color your clay, any color you want. And it gives it kind of this light, kind of almost airy effect. I don't know how, yeah. and it's going to put the color to the, you know, the highest level clay. So honestly, this works, but another way would be to have the clay darker, right? If you needed the darkness of the clay underneath for the depth, and then you just wanted to highlight the fur, you could go with a lighter, or anything, whatever you want to highlight, you could go with just a lighter pastel. So you use the pastels just almost like you would use paint. But it's, you know, a dry effect that looks, it does look different from paint. It looks almost airbrushed. So that is that technique. The next one is similar, but it's not a pastel, it's a micro pearl. And I'm going to use Pearl X. These are super shimmery, super fine pigments, and they are very nice for mermaid scales and fish scales, or dragons. So there's our texture sheet from the other day. And again, you're going to use a fine brush, like actually makeup brushes work really well for this. This is just an e.l.f. makeup brush, eye makeup brush. This stuff, I spilt it once on my carpet. What a mess. It just looks like, you know, flour or baking powder in there, but it's super shiny. And you only need a little bit. Even less. Try to get the excess off of there. And when you put it on there, it just makes it really, really shiny. Now, Primo makes Primo Effect clay that has the shimmer effect already, but it only comes in certain colors. So if you want a particular color that they don't have in that effect, you can still get that same effect with these pigments. And it's just really pretty, really shiny. And these are the 5 techniques we talked about today, the 5 coloring techniques we talked about today. We have just a plain acrylic paint, we have alcohol inks, the rub and buff, chalk pastels, and micro pearl. If you want more information about any of these products used, you can go to my blog at lilypolyclay.com.